Want to remind everyone we are a member of the Big Sky Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Colby Peterson. On the show today, we have Jessica Euler, fresh off of, I swear you traveled recently. You went somewhere I saw on social media. Maybe
the most recent one I did was, the road trip to Bozeman for Montana State football. And, now we're just seeing at what point do I want to drive 10, 12 hours again. So,
I mean, the road is always open to you, Jessica. That's what's great about America.
At this point, it's like anytime I can sit in the rain and watch sports might be what I'm going for.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm sure you were. I think
I saw you got another driver.
Right.
just mix it up a little, right? Definitely out there at Stewart Stadium this weekend, no doubt. Taking in that rainy, cold game. Disappointing to lose to the Stingers, but whatever. But good. Glad you're joining us here tonight to talk a little volleyball. We also have a new panelist for you all tonight. If you've been following Weber State softball, especially in the Weber State fans Facebook group, you've probably seen some of David's
softball, but volleyball.
Sorry, volleyball. My bad. Volleyball. We're talking volleyball. And if you've seen David's posts, you've probably seen him breaking down some of these volleyball matches. And so we thought, hey, let's bring David in to talk volleyball with us as we sort of work through and get closer to the conference season. So, David Moore, thank you so much for joining us tonight and joining the Weber State Weekly panel, man.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've really been enjoying following the team for the last few years, bringing a few posters to the game, cheering them on, and they've been doing really well since I've been watching. So hopefully I had a tiny part of that.
That's true. If you've been to Club Swenson, you will notice that David and his wife are the ones bringing the signs. And I'm very pro bringing signs, whether that's to the Purple Palace, Stewart Stadium, Club Swenson. I love that stuff, man. So if you see David out there, don't leave him hanging, folks. Bring your signs to Club Swenson as we take in volleyball matches, as we got just a couple left on the home schedule. But yeah, David, love the signs, love the enthusiasm, man.
Yeah, it's good to have some sports to cheer on. It's nice to have a good local volleyball team.
Yeah, good one indeed. So let's talk a little bit about today's show. We're going to do some match analysis of last weekend's sets against Idaho and Eastern Washington, both at Club Swenson. Then we'll take a look at the upcoming matches for this week. Wildcats are taking their final trip on the road because they will be playing the conference tournament at home at Club Swenson, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But this road trip will see the Wildcats go technically up to northern Arizona, 6,600 feet up there. And then they'll also take a trip over to Greeley to face hated rival northern Colorado. Yeah, man. And so we'll see how that one goes. But before we get into all of that analysis, want to encourage everybody to subscribe to the show, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, also on YouTube. Good places to find Weber State Weekly and these shows. Also, if you could, please take some time, rate us on those platforms. Really appreciate you giving us a thumbs up, subscribing on YouTube, subscribing on any of those channels, but also giving us those ratings. They really make a difference. Help us find our way into the ears of more Wildcat fans wherever they may be. Social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all good places to interact with us. I've been hitting I've been getting on social media a lot lately, trying to get more folks to come on the show. And so we've got, particularly in football, we got a number of former players that will be joining us in the coming weeks. So look forward to that. Need to do the same thing for volleyball, though. But social media, a great place to interact with us. And then, of course, patreon.com/Weber State Weekly. Appreciate our folks, our patrons. They really make it happen. So thank you to our patrons. Love you guys. So, folks, let's talk a little bit about last week. As we said, Wildcats at home at Club Swenson to face the Idaho Vandals, and then on Saturday facing Eastern Washington Eagles. So let's start with Idaho. Wanted to kind of give you guys just some, like, an opening salvo. Talk to me about kind of the way you felt at the end of that Idaho match. Give me kind of your feelings when that one was all said and done.
I actually want to back up to the start of the Idaho match. Because I have never seen Weber pass as accurately as they did in the opening section of that match. You know, it's not just avoiding passing errors, but it's putting the ball right on the net, right to the right of the middle, where you can do absolutely anything with the ball. It just makes Kate's life so much easier to have a perfect set. or to have a perfect pass. And I never saw a streak like that. And they only ended up going 7-6 while they were in that streak. Obviously, they weren't doing any passing when they ran off a whole string of points after that.
Yeah.
But I don't know what got into the team there, but they just came out so precise that it's like, okay, this one's gonna go well.
Yeah, and I think just building on what David said, it was good to see the team come together like that. We've seen a lot of rotations throughout the season, and we've seen, different sets of players just play differently together as we're starting to get some of those freshmen out there playing, and to come out and win against Idaho when we had some disappointing matches beforehand.
Yeah.
I think it was great to see the team come together and really start to mesh. I think we're starting to see what our lineup is going to look like kind of long term. And it was good to have a win under our belt because I think it helped us even, a couple days later.
Yeah, I agree, because obviously the Wildcats had just one match the previous week, and it was to the Stripes. Dropped that match 3-1 at Club Swenson. Nobody, I think, here at Weber State Weekly expected that to be an L. I think everybody had that penciled in, as especially the streak that Idaho State had been on to that point. I think they were on like a 5 or 6 match losing streak, and so it was just looked for all intents and purposes like a very winnable match. And the Wildcats had a tough time and dropped it. So it was good to see them bounce back in this match against Idaho and just make sure they took care of business, get back to winning ways. I think you're right too, Jessica, that getting that sweep under the belt, I think that they were left wanting a little bit at the end of that Idaho sweep. It wasn't as dominant maybe as they had hoped. And so I think that kind of fueled them going into the Eastern Washington match on Saturday to really take better care and follow through and make sure that they didn't feel that way again at the end of that match on Saturday.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I also thought this was the first time where the whole match they used the same rotations. They used the same back row substitutions. They used the same libero. They used the same front row. It's like clockwork. This is finally our lineup, and I'm happy because it was their Valkyrie lineup that I enjoy watching, where they've got Emma, Brielle, and Ashley starting along the front, just being this giant wall of blondes, intimidating the other teams. So, of course, in the next match, they did change the lineup a bit because Charlie didn't play against Idaho, but then she got in the maybe just the last set against Eastern Washington. So, but yeah, I remember all season it seemed like the coach has been tinkering with his lineup every game or at least every match. And that Idaho match, it's just, nope, we're good.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit more about the Idaho match, dig in a little bit deeper. So in the first set against Idaho, Weber State almost had that 5-0 run, but then they did have that 5-0 run, almost had a 5-0 run, then ended with a service error. And we've talked a little bit about that this season, about how sometimes service errors kind of kill the momentum that they have. Luckily, it doesn't phase them in this case. This is about mid-set. They go on another 4-0 run, and that kind of is the thing that pulls them away and gives them this opportunity to kind of like close it out. But I wanted to ask, do you think that they're getting a little bit more resilient in those situations where normally they're rolling and they make a mistake? It gives the other team an opportunity to get back in, and mentally they have some issues, and the opposite team kind of makes those runs to find their way back into the set when the Wildcats are on the cusp of pulling away. How do you see their bounce back from, mistakes like that? Do you see it as, yes, they're getting more resilient, or you see it as, that in that case they did, but there's still more work to do?
And I thought the whole Idaho match, like you're saying, it wasn't a really dominating match. It was kind of they played well enough to sweep. That's pretty good. But I don't know. It didn't seem like they were ever flying that high, even when they got their streaks. So, yeah, it's hard for me to judge exactly what was going through their heads.
I think what helped even a little bit with this is I think, yeah, we're getting more resilient. I think sticking with the same lineup throughout the match is helpful because, it's a predictable group that you're out there with. But Idaho had quite a few service errors as well throughout. So that helped, I think, just our headspace whenever they're having mistakes too. So I think we are becoming more resilient and saying, hey, that's just one. There's fewer times it feels like we're calling timeout just to bring ourselves back together, right? Because earlier in the season, it seems like there would be a few times that Maya would use the timeout to be like, okay, let's just take a breather here. And we're using less of those. So I think that's because we're getting in a space where we're kind of self-correcting. But I do think this particular one helped because Idaho had quite a few service errors themselves.
Yeah. And like, do you all think that that's like a chemistry thing where now we're nearing the end of their first season, playing? Some of these ladies had played club together, but as a unit, as a group, this Wildcat team has now played almost an entire season together. There's some chemistry there. They spent a lot of time. They've gotten with the coaching staff. Do you think that that's also a factor in, bouncing back and being able to self-correct? Jessica, is that how you see it?
I do. I mean, I think a lot of it helps. I think Michaela libero helps a lot. Like, I feel like in that position, she's helping to manage, and you can kind of watch her doing that. And so I think that having the team mesh together is really helping them work through issues together. But I also, I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but I think the consistency helps as well. So absolutely. I think it's helping him work through. And it just, I say this all the time, but it makes me so excited that we have such a team of freshmen, because to get to this point, right, there were points in this season where I was like, okay, so we're going to let this one go, right? Like, it's a
growing
learning
pains is what we called them throughout the season,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, there were so many times this season I'm like, okay, it's okay. Like, we're going to get through this year and next year we're going to be good. But to be tied for first place right now, holy bananas. Like, I am just so excited with a team of freshmen like this. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Now, did you see that Idaho has even more freshmen than Weber does?
No way. No way.
Yes, they've got like 8.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, that's good news for them.
And it's a first-year coach.
Yeah, and they have a
So
first-year head coach as well. And so completely new regime up in Moscow.
Yeah, I think they're not doing well this year, but that's going to set them up better for next year. But yeah, I was looking at that roster and it's like, how can they have more freshmen on their roster than Weaver does?
Yeah,
they do.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in some of the other podcasts that talked about how it's good that Idaho's back in the conference. I think having them in the footprint, they're a school that I think will improve in many aspects. In football, I think they're ahead of schedule this year, but as time goes on, they're just the kind of school that has the resources to invest in. So I think that they'll eventually become a player in the Big Sky and kind of settle in. They've settled in some other sports. They'll continue to do that in some of these ones that they haven't quite yet. And I like having Idaho in the conference.
Yeah.
But David, I wanted to ask you, because Jessica mentioned this a little bit earlier, that Michaela Sorensen playing libero throughout the Idaho match. Do you think that she's kind of settled back into that role now, or might we see her play outside again in some of these remaining matches in the season?
I don't think you will. When they've been doing these lineup changes every single match, it's been, can we get good enough libero play out of someone else that Michaela can go hit in the front line? Because I'm sure she'd like to. But every match it seemed like, no, we need to get Michaela in that other jersey and have her solidify our serve receive, because as the libero, she's going to be receiving a third. Well, she's going to be there in every service reception rotation. And with Ashley having such a good weekend, such a good weekend as well, that solidifies her place starting outside. And so I think that we've seen their real lineup now. That, there's still some question of who's going to be playing some back row defensive specialist. But I think we're just going to see Michaela the rest of the time and Ashley the rest of the time in those roles that they had in Idaho and against Idaho and against Eastern Washington.
And I completely agree. And I think what we might see is exactly what you pointed out earlier, David, where if we're going to sweep again in that third set, we might bring out Charlie. And we've talked about it a little bit before. I think Charlie is one heck of a server, and I can't wait to see how she develops over time as well. And just to get that experience there, but to get us through the rest of the season and be sitting at the top where we are, then it makes sense to stick with Michaela and Ashley moving forward.
Right. And I feel like they've, bounced back and forth between Charlie and Macy in the different matches, Charlie had that amazing 18 dig match. What was that, last week? No, that was the week before. And I think she really showed what she can do when she's on her game. And I think that shows why she's been getting all of these starts. But then it hasn't worked out in the actual match play, except for that one really awesome match. Right. So, I kind of understood why she disappeared against Idaho, but I was glad to see her be getting another chance against Eastern Washington. At the same time, I thought that maybe that was because Maya, was looking at what Macy was doing and not switching. But then it's been interesting to see Jada's solidified her role all the time in that position as the season's gone on.
Yeah,
I've seen her quite a bit. And so I wanted to ask one more question about this Idaho match. So the Wildcats needed a late 6-0 run in the third set to kind of close things out. They were down 19-16, and so that 6-0 run, puts them up 22-19. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. And then Idaho gets a couple, and they tie it at 22. And so I kind of wondered, did you all feel that it was mental lapse that put them in that situation in the first place, where it was like, why are they down 19-16 to Idaho in the third set? Because Idaho is the worst team in the conference. Or is it more of a like, listen, Colby, it's the Big Sky Conference. Anybody can beat anybody. You know that. You saw what happened against the Stripes just a couple of weeks ago. How did you all see that close out to the match where they needed that 6-0 run? Idaho comes back, ties it at 22. And then the Wildcats go on to, close 5. Let me just make sure I got this right. I was on the wrong set. And the Wildcats go out and they close it. They go on a little short 3-0 run there to just end it at 25-22.
I would say that how many freshmen are on the team? You still have to learn how to win, how to close out, how to stay solid when you're ahead. This is going to be a learning season. If we have success closing out the season, if we have success in the tournament, that's awesome. But some of these younger players just need to work their way through it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is to, we've seen us as a team personally come back after being down a couple of sets, right? And so motivation is strong for the other team. And I think us combined with, like David saying, a strong freshman team that needs to close out, combined with an Idaho team who's got nothing to lose, right? True. I think we're going to see some things like that from time to time. And I think the bigger part of this is that we were able to come back, right? Because whenever we've had close sets so many times throughout the season. And I think that's exactly what it is. We're new working on closing, but we have teams that are going to come in strong at the end too. So I was proud of us for still being able to pull it out there in the end.
Yeah.
And there's just a really classic volleyball plot of one team winning the first two sets, the other one picks off the third, and then the team that won the first two finishes the job. And sometimes the other team manages to pick off the third set, and sometimes they don't.
Right.
And so, that's pretty standard mentally.
You all made good points. Obviously, we've talked about it all season. A young team, learning to play together, learning to close matches, like you were saying, David. The tournament is just around the corner, just a couple of weeks away. And even though it will be at Club Swenson this year, do you think that they are going to feel that pressure going into the conference tournament, or will they be more like what you were saying with Idaho, Jessica, where it's like, we've got nothing to lose because nobody expects anything from us really at this point. It's house money. You're in the conference tournament, so just play loose and just see what it brings you. No one expects you to be the conference champion, so just see what you can do. Or do they get a little bit tight and feel like, okay, now it's conference tournament time, the lights are getting brighter? I don't know. How do you see them?
I think that all comes down to Maya a little bit. No pressure to him, right?
Fair.
But
Yeah.
part of it's how you set up the team, because we're absolutely going to start to get in that place. Because even though nobody expected us to be first place, right now we are. We don't want to let go of that, right? And I think when that happens, we tend to start to forget, like, gosh, this is incredible. Like, ride this wave, right? And so I'm hoping that a combination of we got nothing to lose, right? Like, we can take this, go out there and play, if we take that approach. And the other thing is we show up good. That's like me talking Arkansas speak is what that is. But when it comes to conference tournament, we have had fantastic showings in prior years, right? So if we can have our fan base show up, that's going to be a motivating factor for our team as well. And I think will make a big difference.
Yeah. Club Swenson, especially when the folks are there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, David, I kind of wanted to get your take on that. I mean, like you said, it is a young team. Teams have to learn how to win. It could be that Maya is obviously going to do his best to prepare them to say, like, listen, guys, like, just go play volleyball. We've seen flashes of the team that they can be. I think a good example is that Sac State match in Ogden a few weeks ago, where we didn't know how it was going to go, and they just totally boat raced Sac State and sent them home. Like, it was just a stunning match where it was like, wow, this team is really something. Also, we were looking at the conference standings before we started this, and I was stunned to go through and realize that both Montana is 8-5 in conference play right now. Montana State is 7-6. I thought that they were worse off than that. Apparently they are not. Those two schools will come to Club Swenson at the end of the season. And so I just wonder if, like, the pressure is ratcheting up as the season goes on, because I thought that once we get past this weekend's matches, it's going to be smooth sailing, but maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that this week will be really telling. The fact that Portland State, that has just looked so dominant, then lost 3 in a row, including 2 in Montana. What happened there? Are they going to bounce back into form and come into the tournament extra hungry because they had that little losing streak? What happens when we go to Greeley and play Northern Colorado? What happens in the regular season is going to have this huge influence on how much momentum each of those teams has going into the tournament. So, great thing about sports is you don't know what's going to happen until it does. And
we play the game.
And we don't even know we don't know who's going to be the number 1 seed. We don't know what the momentum's going to be. So you know, I'm more curious about this week than the tournament so far because that's going to have so much impact.
Yeah. I mean, 6 teams in the conference right now, separated by a total of just 3 games. That's pretty tight. You know, you could extend that even down to, I mean, you could say 7 teams within four matches. I think that maybe that's a stretch, but 3 matches, the difference between 6 teams at the top of the conference. So, wow. But let's turn our attention to the Eastern Washington match now. You talked about the impact of Ashley Knighting. She had a big match against Eastern. She hit .435 on 23 attempts, only 2 errors in that one. I checked the numbers and I was like, I wonder if she's had if this is her best match ever in a Wildcat uniform. She had similar numbers against San Jose State, or the second match I think she ever played in as a Wildcat. What do you think was the difference for her in this one? Because there's a big gap between that San Jose State match and this Eastern Washington match.
I mean, I think she's just took the next step up in maturity. I think that the way they were riding her hot hand, it reminded me of how they go to Danny a lot of times. With Danny, a lot of times it's bailing out because they don't have a lot of options. And this time it's like, no, we're just going to feed her because she's going over the block and down, I think was what was happening. So I wouldn't be surprised for this to just be the new normal for Ashley.
And that's great, right? That's absolutely great if that continues to be, because, I mean, she's not going to hit .435 every game, although she does, fine by me. You know, but you know, if that number could stay relatively elevated, and she continues to hit at a clip with so few mistakes, I mean, my goodness, what a player. Jessica, what's your take?
Right.
Yeah, I think she was just incredible, and I think we found something that works, right? Like Eastern Washington had an incredible block. Like there were a couple times I'm pulling up their roster, I'm like, how tall are these women? Because their front was all over 6 foot, right? And some of them well over 6 foot. And Ashley was able to get through there and had one heck of a night. And it is one of those times where, exactly like David said, you find what's working and you make it happen. And I think we'll continue to see stuff like this once we have that lineup that we're sticking with, right? I think that makes a big difference for this. And Ashley found her groove and we were like, okay, take it.
Yeah, I mean, a good point.
Now, speaking of their height, though, I thought one of the most hilarious things in that match was the tallest person on their team, Ehu Kiala, only played back row. She only substituted in and played back row.
Yes, that's what I was doing. Even their back row's tall. Yes.
And it's not like she went and hit out of the back row. You know, she just is a good passer and apparently a good floor cleaner because she had her towel tucked into her shorts the whole time.
She did. Yes.
It's like, okay, seniors get to do the dirty work or something on that team. I went and talked to the coach after, because it's like, you know, we had Danny play libero when her shoulder, was it her shoulder that was injured?
I think so. Yeah, I can't remember. I don't remember what exactly the injury was, but she was out.
It was a shoulder injury, right? And so she could play, but couldn't play front row. So it's like, swing, our Danny Richens, our libero, right? And but I thought they did us one better. Oh, so I asked the coach, you know, has she got an injury or something that she's just playing the back? And he's like, no, she's healthy. Like, okay, but that was the oddest thing I thought in that match.
Yeah, well, Jessica, a good point. Like you said, the Wildcats lead the conference in blocks. I mean, right now, in fact, the Wildcats in the nation, they are 21st. They average 2.6 blocks a set. And so in this match, Eastern right there with them. Wildcats end up with 8. Eastern ends up with 7. So it was a good showing by them in that way, but they were just deficient in others. Yeah. And one of those ways was that, I mean, the Wildcat offense did a fairly good job. They had these really good, large chunk runs in this Eastern Washington match. And one of those was, I mean, that first set was a little bit of a nail biter because, you know, it kind of, you know, went into quote unquote extras, as it were, in volleyball, kind of. Wildcats ended up taking the set 26-24, but they needed a 6-0 run to close that one out. You know, and because
you notice they were in
10.
their, you notice they were in their Valkyrie lineup for that run, right? That was Ashley Brielle and Emma putting up the big block for that run. So it's like, yeah, we're in that situation, but we've got that front line plus Danny as an option out of the back. That's just our power rotation right there. So I was a bit, you know, if you have to be in that must-win situation, I was glad that it was doing it in our best rotation.
Yeah, because I mean, Eastern had some runs of their own in that set to be competitive, and I think it was really, really critical that the Wildcats pulled that one off, because it felt like winning that first set 26-24 maybe deflates Eastern a little bit, right? Whereas should they pull it off, they might gain some confidence in the way that Idaho State did, where Idaho State, they get through and then it's like, wait a minute, we can play. And they have a little bit of confidence, and then they're playing a little bit more loosely. This was not the case, it seemed, with Eastern, because the Wildcats go on that big run to close them out. You know, the Wildcats were down 24-20 at that point. Like, Eastern was knocking on the door, ready to close out that first set, and the Wildcats come roaring back and win it 26-24. So big swing. I think sort of like what you all talked about a little bit earlier, learning to close out sets and close out games. Another big example of that, and learning how to win, learning which lineups, like you said, David, are the ones that will be needed to get some of those points when the chips are down. I think that one set, which feels dumb because it's like it was the first set, Colby. There was tons more volleyball to play, but maybe in some ways it sets the tone, because Eastern never gets close again, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It gave us momentum that I think carried us throughout the rest, because I think it would have been easy to, you know, think what we were just talking about. Like, man, they're just as good at blocking us as we are, right? And I think bringing in that lineup and, you know, closing out gave us the momentum that it kind of took us through the rest of the match.
And is that the sort of thing in reverse from what happened with the Idaho State match?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like that critical moment where, you know, it goes the opposite way, completely shifts the momentum away from, you know, Eastern, where the Stripes ended up with that momentum. Plus, you know, there were a fair contingent of Idaho State fans in the crowd that night because of local product. Emery Satawala was there. A number of her family members were there to cheer her on. Understandable, right? And she had a good match. But if that first set goes differently, are we all alone in first place right now? You know what I mean?
Right.
Potentially. You never know. That's why we play the game, right, David? That's why we play the game. But I want to talk a little bit about Brielle Rickert here, because Brielle had a really phenomenal night. She continues to hit at a really high clip. Right now, she leads the conference in hitting percentage. We talked about that last week. She continues to do so, and she's closing in on 100 kills in her young career. And keep in mind that she is not a player that started the season. We saw Sani Katoa, who really started the season. Sani, I think, has been out with some injury, and it's given Brielle this opportunity to kind of show up, and she has continued to do so. She had another really big game, ends up with 12 kills on 23 attempts, just 2 errors, 435. Sorry, that was Ashley, my bad. That was 6 kills on 12 attempts with just 1 error. Hits 417 in this one. I mean, it feels like in the middle, where the Wildcats were so thin last year, that's no longer the case. There are so many options in the middle this year.
Right. And checking my notes, I realized I was talking about that streak of perfect passes as if it happened in the Idaho game, but it was actually in the Eastern Washington game where they got all those passes. And having a perfect pass makes such a big difference to the hitting percentage for the middle, because when the setter is just one step off the net, then you're having to look back to pick up the ball, and you're not able to see the block nearly as well. Whereas if the pass is right on the net, then you can be looking at the blockers as well as the ball, and hit for that high percentage. So, the hitting percentage of the middles has so much to do with having perfect passes that that Weber was having to a high degree in that Eastern Washington match.
Yeah, and you see it often, right? Where when the ball gets close to the net and the setter is, like you said, David, close, they don't have to put it up very high, right? And the middles, usually if it's that close to the net and they're putting it up, the middle is going to send it with authority. That happens all the time. And that's a very, very difficult ball to dig out. So oftentimes a kill, and it's all set up because, like you said, David, of those good passes.
Right. Yeah. On the worst passing nights, you see the only time that Kate is setting the middle, she might be 2 steps off the net and shooting it forward toward the middle hitter. And they have they can get one-on-one blocked in the middle in that case. If you've got the pass in the right place, you have so many options as a middle hitter to turn it in different directions that you're always going to be able to evade them.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. Last thing I wanted to talk about here in the Eastern match was Danny Richens. Another tough night for her. She ends up just hitting 100 on 30 attempts, 5 errors. And like we said, Eastern, not necessarily their block was better in this match. Like we said, they're right there with the Wildcats. But it seems like I went back and looked through some of the numbers, and Danny's she's had a rough year where anytime that she has a good game, it's usually followed by some sort of rough night for her. And I just wondered, what do you guys think is causing that for her? Because she was very, very consistent, the last couple of years. It's one of the reasons why she was conference valuable player last year. She was a first team All-American, a first team All-Conference player the year before, both years. But this year, it's been a little bit different. What do you think is causing that for her, where she'll have a great game and then she'll have a little bit of a down game?
I think part of it is just having such a new team, right? And it's a lot of pressure on behalf of Danny to continue to maintain, right? To be this awesome for so long and to, kind of be the leader of the team in many regards, right? I'm going to imagine, feel like a lot of pressure for her to both maintain her own awesomeness with having a brand new team and also taking on a role of kind of, helping to facilitate team dynamics overall. So I think that we're just seeing her adjust, and she's still incredibly awesome. She's got a lot going on, it feels like.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking
it's interesting to compare with last year. I thought last year she had sort of a slow whole series of games, especially before the conference got started, where her passing was off, and maybe she's spreading out her weaker games around the season more this year than what happened last year. It's also, the Rylan and Danny last year had so many attempts. I thought they rode them too heavily. Just, when their passing wasn't great, it's like, and we're going to Danny again, and we're going to Danny again. And it's, it hasn't been that same way. But I don't know what, knowing you're going to get a massive number of swings every time, or a slightly less massive number of swings. I'm not sure what that does, if that somehow plays into that on-off game thing you're noticing in the statistics.
Yeah. Another thing I was thinking about, David, that kind of is a portion of that was that in those seasons, you mentioned Rylan Adams, right? That there was this opportunity that it wasn't always just Danny Nay, now Danny Richens, who the Wildcats could go to. They had a couple of options, right? And Rylan Adams, also an All-American in her own right, a Conference Player of the Year in her own right in the spring season, and so there was a split. It wasn't necessarily all about Danny all the time because there were options. Whereas this year, it's taken a bit of time, like you both have mentioned, that working through lineups, getting players comfortable in them with the new coaching staff and understanding their role in that. And you have Danny as somebody who is familiar with that system, has played in that system and been successful in that system for a number of years. And when the system isn't necessarily working because the players are still learning it, the obvious thing is to, like you said, David, go to Danny because she knows what to do. And that draws the defense a little bit to say, okay, well, if we just go over here and we double her and we shut that down, their offense is going to have a hard time finding points. And so she's going to get a lot of attempts, but the defense is aware of those attempts and they gravitate toward it, which makes it difficult for her to find the floor. It seems like maybe that's letting up now because the team is figuring it out. We're having good games from like Ashley Knighting and others. And so we've, Emma Mangum has had a number of really good games this season. And so it feels like next season should probably be a return to form, is my guess, of the Danny Richens that we've seen in the past.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's also been interesting. I mean, she was our ace queen last year.
Yeah.
And what happened?
I think I had that same thought a little bit too, that she was hitting all kinds of aces.
Yeah, Wildcats have not been as dominant from the service line. We've talked a little bit about that, right? I'm still using #Ace State, folks. Still doing it, but you both make a good point that the Wildcats not as dominant. We've talked about that a couple of shows ago about how, once again, players getting coached up by this coaching staff. We know that the more time that these new players spend with them, the more they will be able to get those skills honed. But if
my wife was bringing up the possibility that it might be more about the Big Sky than about Weber. I don't know. I'd be curious for you to research this, Colby. If you've got a team that's near the top of the country in aces, does that mean that in the preseason that all the other teams say, hey, we have really got to drill on service reception because we're going to be facing a challenging opponent in that area? So has the whole Big Sky leveled up in their serve receive? That'd be an interesting question to look at.
Yeah. Look at the numbers potentially overall compared, last year compared to this year, how teams did in their serve receive. Is it getting better? Because you make a good point, David, where if teams know that's on the scouting report, they're going to have to try and prepare for that. And especially where there aren't as many strong servers on the team, you prepare your serve receive a little bit differently to say, like, okay, these are the folks that we need to watch out for. So we're more apt to be ready for those serves to come over, and we'll be able to dig them out and run our system, right?
Yeah. One of the things you always see that after an ace is a typical time for a timeout to occur. And that happened in Eastern Washington. There was one drop serve that landed in front of Danny and Jada without either of them taking a step. And Maya took a timeout right there. And I'm always curious, is he calling that timeout to say, move your darn feet? Or is he trying to ice the server because the server on the next serve just had a terrible service error right in the bottom of the net? It's like, okay, good job. That worked.
Yeah, it's like icing the kicker, right? Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I have to continue to watch and see, the success rate of calling those timeouts and see. But let's look forward.
I'm always hoping when they do that to our team, it's like, get this one over.
Get it back. Yeah. Just don't let them. Don't let them. Keep it going.
Yep.
Let's take a little look forward now. Like we said, last road trip of the regular season for the Wildcats. So we'll be taking the trip up to Northern Arizona, just doing some digging in the conference stats about Northern Arizona. Their only conference wins so far this season have been against Eastern Washington and, strangely, Northern Colorado. Northern Colorado has dropped some really weird matches this season. This was one. I think part of that is probably because they're playing in Flagstaff. I mean, what do you guys think? Like, are you nervous about the Flagstaff match? Weird things happen in Flagstaff. How are you feeling about facing Northern Arizona in Flagstaff at 6,600 feet? Think it's a factor, or think they can deal with it?
It's never my favorite, but I do feel like we already had one team we looked past, right? So Idaho State, I feel like we looked past them a little bit, and it showed. And I think that will make us be more prepared for Northern Arizona, knowing that this is a game where we have to play all in and keep a consistent lineup just to get ready for Northern Colorado. But always a little bit anxious in Flagstaff, but I do think that just having that Idaho State experience already is going to help us be more prepared for Northern Arizona.
Yeah, that is a hope.
Yeah, and I'm fairly new to the Northern Arizona jinx, so
you'll see
I'll have to see it for myself, or hopefully not see it for myself.
I think a prime example of the Northern Arizona jinx is in the shortened spring season of 2021. The Wildcats blew through the entire conference and lost one match that year before becoming conference champions and going on to the NCAA tournament. That one match was in Northern Arizona, was in Flagstaff, and they bounced back from it. They walloped the Jacks in the second game of that series because they had to play two in one location that year. But yeah, man, it's just a thing. But talking a little bit more about the team itself, NAU is not so. Going through the stats was like, okay, they're not great defensively. They have some offensive problems. They're dead last in the conference in opponent digs, dead last in the conference in opponent kills, opponent assists. They're 8 out of 10 teams in the conference in opponent blocks and opponent hit percentage. So the question was this. The offense has not been great. I think defense has been a calling card of this team, this Wildcat team this season. There's an opportunity to maybe tune some things up offensively. David, you talked about getting better at the passing game, getting that set, because you're going to need to be very sharp for the following match, which is Northern Colorado at the bank in Greeley. Do you see this as an opportunity to work on some of those offensive things and get that going, to roll in with a little bit of confidence going into Greeley, because that is going to be an absolutely difficult match?
Right. One thing that, it's not directly about Northern Arizona, but when we were playing that match against Idaho State, one of the trickier things on offense is your block coverage. And that is, if you get blocked, can you pick up the ball without it going down for a point? And you really have to be ready and set up, because those plays happen so fast. It's awesome to watch Kate Standiford in that situation, because she really responds to the, oh, there's the ball situation better than anybody else on the team. And against Idaho State, the team was pretty weak in that block coverage situation, and they got a lot better against Idaho. I'm guessing that there was some coaching emphasis of, hey, you might want to be ready in case we get blocked, and it wasn't quite as good against Eastern Washington. So I hope that against Northern Arizona they get a chance to really be working on that, Northern Arizona might not block them much, but let's be ready for when they do.
Jessica, I'm gonna give you a final word. Any last things to say about the Jacks before we talk about the Bears?
No, I don't want to talk about them. I'm just gonna get through it.
Fair enough. Let's move on.
Let's talk anything. We're gonna get through it. It's gonna be great.
Let's talk about hated rival Northern Colorado. Guys, this is it. This is the Wildcats' one match against Northern Colorado. We've seen them. I went back and looked. We've seen them in each of the last 4 conference tournaments. Not all have been in the championship game. 3 of those were in the conference championship. The Bears have won 2. The Wildcats have won 1. But the one in 2018 was in the second round of the conference tournament where the Wildcats got swept. So hated rival. But one thing I wanted to point out was, like we said earlier with Northern Arizona, there's been some really weird matches where Northern Colorado has lost. They lost to Idaho State in Pocatello. They lost to Northern Arizona in Flagstaff. But then they also have had some really dominant wins where, a couple weeks ago, I think it was actually last week, they took the roadie out to Sacramento State, then up to Portland State, handled both of those games. I don't know. This is a home game for them. It's a home match in Greeley. Do you think that is there an opportunity, you think, for them to mentally maybe not be ready? Or because if you remember the game in Ogden last year, it was the last volleyball match that I went to before we moved to Nashville, pummeled them. Northern Colorado was not ready for that match in Ogden. They just got absolutely decimated. And it was like, wow, what a performance. How do you see this one? I mean, Northern Colorado has had their ups, but they've also had their downs.
I think that we have to hope that Ashley has shown her new face, and that Brielle goes off again. Because if the two of them go off and hit for that high percentage, then game on. And if we get bit by our freshmanness, then maybe game off. So, we definitely got a puncher's chance in there.
Yeah, I'm kind of sitting right there. Northern Colorado has a really heavy freshman team too. Whenever I look at both teams, like we've just got a lot of similarities, right? And a lot of history. And I think when you come down to those two things, it makes a big difference. And I think it's going to be interesting to see. And what just makes me happy is we got the conference tournament right after it. So whatever happens, I think, we've got another opportunity right around the corner there. I am not sure how this one is going to go. I think it's just going to depend on how we show up that day. Kind of exactly what David was saying. Like, it's going to depend on the headspace we're in. Heck, it's going to depend on how much sleep we got the night before. There's just a lot of different factors there. And I think it's just going to be a real close game. I wouldn't be surprised to see it go into 4 or 5 sets. And I think it'll be a good one to watch.
Yeah, I hope so. Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that emotions are a part of this? Because there are a number of there are a number of new faces on the Wildcats side. Obviously, that core group of Wildcats who faced the Bears a number of times and lost at their hands, but also won in that spring season. Many of those faces are gone now. But on the flip side, there is some experience still on the Bears side that remember at least last year. And so, is that rivalry, that emotion there, or is it too many new faces on both sides for it to really be terribly hot?
I'm going with it's terribly hot.
Okay. Because it could be for first place, right? Like, it could be if the Wildcats win on Thursday night in Flagstaff, both team is playing for first place with a week to go in the conference regular season. So I don't know.
Yeah. I'm so excited.
One of the things that they could be an important deciding factor. I watched the Portland State Northern Colorado match, and what I was really impressed with both teams is what I guess is now called the transition game. You know, Weber's has got awesome defense, but we don't always get a great attack out of that defense. There's a lot of passing the ball over the net after a dig. There's not necessarily getting the big swings in coming right back from the other team's big swings. And that's what I was noticing Northern Colorado and Portland State do so well when they were hammering on each other, was that when they were getting the ball back, they were getting it back with authority. And I haven't seen Weber do that super well. I've seen them, you know, pick up wild balls, but it would be awesome if that could emerge in this match and then carry through into the tournament.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, definitely pressure on the defense if that's the case. And that's a place where you want to be. Last thing on this, and then we'll look at the upcoming schedule. Sid Cole and KJ Ince have an absolutely, I think it's at this point in Big Sky tournament or in Big Sky play. I mean, it's a fairly legendary connection, right? So how do you slow that duo down? Because Sid Cole has proven herself to be a very capable setter, so much so that that they benched Daisy Schultz to play Sid Cole, which is saying something, right? Because Daisy Schultz is the Northern Colorado equivalent of Ashlyn Power. But they said, no, we're going to play Sid Cole over her last season. And now we saw the impact that has had for Sid Cole, because she's been absolutely phenomenal this year in distributing the ball to her team. Northern Colorado offensively is a dynamo. And so slow them down.
I think this is just one of the places where it excels to have defense as good as we have, right? We are, like you mentioned a second ago, we're in the top with blocks per set, where we just are an incredible defensive team. And I think giving ourselves credit for that, because it's easy to look at a matchup like this and start to think, oh gosh, like, how are we going to defend that? But we need to give ourselves credit too with our defense, right? And it's a whole team, so we've got to have the offense to cover. But I think we have the capability of any team in the Big Sky, and a whole lot of teams across the nation, right? That we can play defense against that. It's just being in that space and realizing it.
David, final word to you on Northern Colorado. How do you slow down that offense?
Ride of the Valkyries, you know.
David likes the Valkyrie lineup, man.
I do.
Hope to see it.
That's usually where we're starting. There are one rotation back, so that we go into it as soon as we side out the first time. So put that big block up there, and good things can happen.
All right. So let's talk about the upcoming schedule, folks. Like we said, Thursday, November 10th, Wildcats taking the trip up to Flagstaff to play the Northern Arizona Lumberjacks, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Match will be on ESPN+. Then Saturday, November 12th, Wildcats taking the trip over to Greeley, facing Northern Colorado, defending conference champions, as we know, because they won it on our floor, which I hate, in 5 sets. That match will be at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard. Then the final week of the regular season will be at home for the Wildcats, Club Swenson. Montana State first on November 17th, Thursday. That match will be at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Get your tickets, WeberStateSports.com or ESPN+. As we have said a number of times this season, Weber State Weekly just so happens to have 2 season tickets to volleyball. So if you're hard up and you are looking for a ticket, just email us, hit us up, message us on social media. Glad to share those with you. And so you can get in there and see the magic that is Club Swenson. And then the final match of the season, the Montana Grizz will come to town on Saturday, November 19th, 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Buy your tickets at WeberStateSports.com or watch it on ESPN+ like me. Then November 23rd through the 26th, as we mentioned, the conference tournament will be in Ogden again this year because the Wildcats were regular season champs last year. And so
keep our fingers crossed for next year.
Yes.
if they
there's
can manage
still a
it.
possibility. Yeah, still a possibility that the Wildcats could continue that trend. So that match, the conference tournament will be from November 23rd to the 26th. So it starts on Wednesday, will end on a Saturday. So check out the conference's website. I looked and I didn't see tickets available yet, but they're there, and or they will be there soon. And so you'll have an opportunity to just show up and be a part of that and just watch the conference slate. Because even if you're not going to see the Wildcats, a lot of good teams, like we said, a lot of good volleyball will get played at Club Swenson that weekend. And who knows? Maybe you get to see the Wildcats play in the championship game one more time. It's house money.
Yep. Cheer off your Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, cheer off that Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah,
perfect. So email us, WeaverStateWeekly@gmail.com, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Patreon, and the blog, WeaverStateWeekly.com. Want to thank you, David Moore and Jessica Euler, for taking some time to chat with us here at Weaver State Weekly tonight, all about volleyball. We'll wrap it up like we usually do. Weaver State, great.